Have you ever imagined losing everything overnight? Your wealth, your status, even the people you trusted most, and waking up on the streets with nothing? This is Ethan Walker's story, a millionaire who believed he had life figured out, until life showed him what real wealth truly means. What he discovers in the cold, unforgiving streets will challenge everything you think about success, failure, and humanity. Stick with this story because by the end, you'll see a transformation so powerful, it will change the way you measure your own life. And if you want more stories that inspire, shock, and teach life-changing lessons, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what's next. Ethan Walker lived the kind of life most people only dream about. His mornings started high above Manhattan, in a glass-walled penthouse that overlooked the city like a throne. The streets below buzzed with noise and chaos, but for Ethan, they were just background music to a life that screamed success. He had the cars, the designer suits, the private dinners at places where the average bill could cover someone's rent for months. To him, money wasn't just a tool, it was the measure of his worth. People gravitated toward Ethan, not just because of his wealth, but because of his confidence. He walked into every room like he owned it because, in a way, he did. Deals followed him, opportunities chased him, and he never had to ask twice for anything. His phone never stopped ringing, his calendar was always full, and his life felt like an endless climb up a mountain that never ran out of peaks to conquer. Every decision Ethan made came with a sense of control. He believed he was untouchable, the architect of his own destiny. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't just see a man. He saw power, influence, and a future that only got brighter with every passing day. He believed that as long as he played the game smart, the game would always reward him. Luxury had become so normal to Ethan that he forgot what it felt like to need anything. If he wanted something, he bought it. If he desired an experience, he made a call and it happened. There were no barriers, no waiting, no hesitation. That ease made him feel invincible, like life itself had chosen him for something extraordinary. But behind that success was a man who rarely stopped to breathe. He wore his ambition like armor, convincing himself that every sleepless night, every missed holiday, was proof that he deserved everything he had. In his mind, balance was for the weak, and slowing down meant someone else would take what was his. Still, there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, when he'd catch himself staring out at the city lights, wondering what it was all for. But those thoughts were easy to push aside. After all, he told himself people would kill for his life. And maybe that was true. What Ethan didn't realize was that the very foundation of his empire was beginning to crack, silently, slowly, in ways he couldn't yet see. And those cracks, they were about to change everything. Ethan's life looked perfect from the outside, but behind the polished surface, cracks were forming. A risky investment he had brushed off as minor started showing troubling signs. The partner he trusted blindly made decisions that didn't align with Ethan's vision, and subtle whispers in the financial world began circling his name. First, he ignored them. He believed his intuition and past success would shield him from any mistake. As weeks passed, small signs became harder to dismiss. Clients who once sought him out started to hesitate. Contracts that seemed secure suddenly stalled. People in his circle, who had always nodded in agreement, began to ask questions he wasn't prepared to answer. Ethan still walked tall, projecting confidence, but inside, doubt was slowly creeping in. He spent late nights in his office, staring at spreadsheets that no longer added up the way they used to. Each number seemed to mock him, a reminder that nothing is truly guaranteed. His usual sharp decisions were clouded with frustration, and even simple choices felt heavier than before. He had always thrived on certainty, and now uncertainty was seeping into every corner of his life. Even social events became tinged with unease. When he laughed with friends at rooftop bars or high-end galas, it felt hollow. The casual conversations about wealth and strategy, which had once energized him, now seemed like a performance he couldn't sustain. He caught himself overanalyzing every comment, every glance, as if the world was quietly turning against him. Despite the warning signs, Ethan convinced himself it was temporary. "I've overcome bigger challenges," he thought, But in truth, he had never faced anything that threatened his very identity. His confidence, once unshakable, was starting to feel brittle, and the world outside his penthouse was beginning to push back in ways he couldn't ignore. The market moved faster than he expected. One deal that was supposed to solidify his empire began unraveling, setting off a chain reaction. He tried to intervene, tried to control it all like he always did, but this time the threads were beyond his grip. Every call he made, every plan he executed, seemed to meet resistance, and the empire he built on wealth and reputation trembled. Ethan's first cracks weren't dramatic. They were quiet, almost invisible. But for a man who measured his life in control and money, they were devastating. What started as whispers, hesitations, and small failures were signaling a much larger storm. And Ethan, confident and ambitious as he was, had no idea how quickly everything could come crashing down. Then it happened. One bad week turned into a bad month, and Ethan realized that the cracks he had ignored were now full-blown fractures. Deals that had seemed secure collapsed without warning. Investors pulled out. The press, which once celebrated his brilliance, now dissected every misstep. Headlines questioned his judgment, his strategy, even his integrity, and the world he thought he controlled felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Clients who had once trusted him implicitly began to vanish. Meetings were canceled, partnerships dissolved. Calls went unanswered, emails ignored. The people he had relied on for advice and guidance either distanced themselves or offered platitudes that didn't help. The empire he had built so carefully, brick by brick, started crumbling, and Ethan had no plan for when the foundation failed. He watched as months of meticulous work unraveled in weeks. Projects he had nurtured for years fell apart overnight. Every boardroom discussion, every late-night strategy session now seemed futile. He realized that wealth and influence, while powerful, couldn't shield him from failure. The illusion of control he had clung to was gone, and panic began to creep in. Even his personal life felt the impact. Friends who had once sought his company now avoided him. Invitations disappeared. Relationships he assumed were strong faltered under pressure. The confidence he had worn like armor was chipped, and with each small setback, Ethan felt the weight of isolation pressing in. He had everything, yet everything was slipping away. Late nights became his reality. He stared at his accounts, his properties, and his assets, trying to make sense of the chaos. Every plan he had relied on seemed insufficient. The numbers no longer aligned, the strategies no longer worked. He had thought his wealth was a shield, but now it felt like a trap that reminded him of what he had lost at every turn. For the first time in his life, Ethan questioned himself. He wondered how a man so careful, so calculated, could end up in such turmoil. The certainty he had taken for granted was gone, replaced by confusion, doubt, and a gnawing sense that he was unprepared for what came next. The world that had once bent to his will was now indifferent to his struggle. And yet, through the collapse, a faint spark remained, a belief that he could somehow regain control. But Ethan was about to learn that some lessons in life are only taught when everything falls apart. The fall had begun, and it would take him further than he could have imagined, setting the stage for a reality he had never faced before. Ethan soon realized that losing money wasn't the worst part. It was the silence that followed. Friends who had laughed at his jokes and toasted his wins now seemed to disappear from his life. Invitations stopped coming, calls went unanswered, and even casual texts from people he considered close were never returned. He wasn't just broke, he was invisible. His girlfriend, once a constant presence, left quietly, unable or unwilling to navigate the storm that was now his life. Family visits became rare, conversations short and strained. It was as if everyone who had been drawn to his wealth had no interest in the man behind the image. Ethan felt the sting of being alone in a world that once celebrated him. The offices that had once buzzed with activity were empty. Colleagues he relied on for support now seemed like strangers. Even his assistant, who had managed schedules and meetings with unwavering loyalty, hesitated when he called. The walls of his high-rise penthouse felt less like a home and more like a prison, a place full of reminders that he had lost the connections he thought were unbreakable. Ethan tried to reach out, to reclaim some semblance of the network he had once commanded. But doors closed, conversations ended abruptly, and the realization set in that many relationships were tied only to his status and money. The people he had counted on weren't gone because of circumstance. They were gone because the currency that once defined him no longer existed. Loneliness settled over him like a shadow. Nights became long and heavy with reflection. He wondered if he had ever truly known anyone beyond what they could give him, beyond the image he projected. The truth was harsh. He had surrounded himself with people drawn to his wealth, not necessarily to him. Even as he walked through Manhattan, among crowds of strangers, Ethan felt the invisible barrier that separated him from others. He had once believed that power and money connected him to the world, but now he saw how disconnected he truly was. The very tools he had relied on to measure success left him isolated when they vanished. It was in this stark loneliness, in the quiet absence of those who had once been near, that Ethan began to glimpse a new reality. A reality where money didn't define human connection, where influence didn't guarantee loyalty, and where he would need to learn lessons far beyond balance sheets and contracts. The first night on the streets was approaching, and nothing would feel familiar again. Ethan's first night without a home was nothing like he had imagined. The penthouse views, the plush beds, the warmth of controlled luxury, all of it was gone. Instead, he faced the cold, unforgiving streets of Manhattan, where wind cut through layers of clothing and noise felt louder when you had nowhere to hide. He realized quickly that wealth had been his shield, and now it was gone. Sitting on a hard park bench, Ethan felt a vulnerability he had never known. People passed him without a glance, immersed in their own worlds. He tried to recall how to survive, but there were no instructions, no strategies that applied to this life. The man who had signed million-dollar contracts now felt invisible, a ghost in the city he had once dominated. Hunger was a new teacher. The pangs in his stomach reminded him that he had taken basic comforts for granted. Even his pride, which had been unshakable, began to fade. Asking for help felt foreign, almost humiliating. Each person he passed seemed to carry an unspoken judgment, a reminder that he was now part of a world he had never fully understood. Ethan wandered the streets, searching for a shelter, for warmth, for someone who might see him as more than a broken millionaire. Every corner felt unfamiliar, every alleyway intimidating. Nights that had once been about celebration now stretched endlessly, filled with uncertainty and fear. The city that had once been a playground now seemed vast and indifferent. He tried to tell himself it was temporary. In a week, I'll figure this out. I'll get back to my life, he muttered to himself, repeating it like a mantra. But the hours stretched, cold and silent, challenging every assumption he had about control. Reality had a way of humbling even the most confident man. Through the night, Ethan began to notice things he had never seen before. The small acts of kindness, the resilience of people sleeping in doorways, the way strangers protected one another without a second thought. It was raw, unfiltered life, and he couldn't escape the sense that he was learning something money had never taught him. By dawn, exhaustion and reflection settled over him. Ethan realized that survival was about more than money, influence, or status. It was about patience, awareness, and connection, lessons that would only deepen in the days ahead. He didn't yet know it, but this first night on the streets was the beginning of a transformation that would challenge everything he had ever believed. Days blurred into nights for Ethan, each one filled with the raw reality of survival. Hunger gnawed at him constantly, reminding him that no bank account could shield him here. He began noticing details he had ignored for years: the rhythm of street life, the timing of bus arrivals, the spots where one could rest without being disturbed. Every observation became a small lifeline. Pride, once his constant companion, slowly slipped away. Asking for a meal or spare change felt foreign, yet necessary. With each hand extended to him, Ethan learned humility. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now learned to nod, to smile, to accept help without shame. Each interaction chipped away at his old ego, replacing it with something more grounded. He watched people navigate this world with resilience he had never admired before. A woman carrying groceries for herself and a child. A veteran keeping to a quiet routine. Kids selling small items to survive. All of them were lessons Ethan absorbed silently. He began to understand that wealth and success were not measures of worth, but tools that could amplify the lessons life already offered. Every day was a test. Small tasks like finding food, securing a safe place to sleep, and staying warm became victories. Ethan's mental checklist of what it takes to survive grew longer, each item steeped in practical insight. The reality of relying on the kindness of strangers was a constant reminder of how fragile the life he had known truly was. Ethan also began noticing the people who tried to take advantage of the vulnerable. He had once judged others for being weak, but here strategy was survival. He learned to read intentions quickly, to sense danger without panic, and to rely on a mix of observation, patience, and instinct. Survival was no longer about money, it was about awareness and adaptability. Slowly, a rhythm developed. Ethan learned which shelters were safer, which street corners offered less risk, and where small opportunities could provide a meal or a friendly word. Life became about navigating patterns, building trust with strangers, and understanding the fragile network that supported those living on the streets. It was a schooling that no classroom could teach. By the end of the first month, Ethan wasn't just surviving, he was learning. Every interaction, every challenge, every small triumph taught him lessons about humanity, resilience, and perspective. The man who had once measured life in dollars now began to value moments of kindness, shared smiles, and quiet victories. And just when he started to feel a small sense of stability, something unexpected arrived. A stranger who would change the course of his days. It was early one chilly morning when Ethan noticed her, Maria. She didn't rush past like everyone else. Her eyes held a quiet awareness, the kind that made him feel seen for the first time in weeks. She carried a cup of coffee, and without hesitation, offered it to him. "Here," she said simply. "It's warm." That small gesture felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. Ethan hesitated, pride clashing with necessity. Accepting the coffee meant admitting he needed help, something he hadn't done in years. But there was something in her calm, in the way she didn't flinch at his worn coat or disheveled hair. It was a reminder that human connection didn't require status, that some people truly saw beyond appearances. Maria asked his name as he sipped the coffee, a question so ordinary it struck him profoundly. Someone was treating him like a person, not a failed millionaire. She mentioned a nearby shelter, describing it with warmth and no judgment. For a moment, Ethan felt the faintest tug of hope, mixed with fear. Stepping inside meant surrendering control, but staying outside offered only cold isolation. The streets that had once felt indifferent now seemed almost welcoming through her presence. Maria spoke of routines, of small acts that kept people safe and alive. Her knowledge of the streets was practical yet humane, and Ethan realized how little he truly understood the world beyond his wealth. She didn't lecture or pity. She guided, and that distinction made all the difference. Ethan almost walked away, stubbornness flaring. But the coffee's warmth seeped through him, and more importantly, the kindness had melted something inside he hadn't realized was frozen. A flicker of trust, a willingness to step into the unknown, grew quietly. Maria's presence became an anchor in a world that had otherwise offered nothing but cold indifference. Walking beside her, Ethan noticed details he had ignored. The faces of those around, the careful navigation of people avoiding harm, the silent gestures of cooperation among strangers. Life on the streets wasn't chaos. It was a complex, invisible web he had never learned to see. And Maria, in her simple act of offering coffee, had opened a door he hadn't even known existed. By the time they reached the shelter, Ethan's mind was racing with realization. Survival wasn't just about finding a bed or a meal. It was about guidance, compassion, and trust. And though he didn't yet understand the full impact, he felt a shift within. A subtle, powerful transformation that would start to define the next chapter of his life. When Ethan entered the shelter, the warmth hit him first, not just from the heaters, but from the life inside. People were talking, sharing meals, and helping each other in ways he hadn't seen outside. It was messy, chaotic even, but it was real. Here, the rules of wealth didn't apply. Here, humanity ruled. That's when he met Tommy, a 12-year-old boy with a smile that didn't quite match his tired eyes. Tommy had nothing to his name except a sandwich he was willing to share. Without hesitation, he offered half to Ethan. That simple act struck him harder than any business deal ever had. Generosity wasn't about money here, it was about heart. Ethan watched as Tommy moved through the shelter, helping others, checking on the elderly, making space for newcomers. The boy had a presence, a sense of responsibility that made Ethan realize how little he had understood about real life. Here was someone who had far less, yet far more to give. For the first time, Ethan listened without judgment. He had spent years deciding who was worthy, who mattered, who deserved attention. But in the shelter, those lines didn't exist. Everyone had a story, everyone had a struggle, and Ethan began to understand that his previous measures of success had blinded him to life itself. He started engaging with others slowly, learning names, asking questions, offering a hand where he could. Tommy became a silent guide, teaching him patience and empathy through small, unspoken lessons. Every smile, every shared task, chipped away at the old Ethan, the man who defined life by money and control. Ethan noticed that the people here, despite hardship, carried resilience. They had routines, rituals, small victories that kept hope alive. Even the youngest or weakest contributed in ways that mattered. And in watching them, Ethan realized that success wasn't a solitary pursuit. True achievement, he saw, was about impact and connection. By the end of his first week at the shelter, Ethan's perspective had shifted dramatically. Money no longer seemed like the ultimate measure of worth. Instead, he felt the stirring of something deeper: understanding, compassion, and a desire to contribute meaningfully. But even as he settled into this new rhythm, a revelation was waiting. One that would redefine everything he thought he knew about life and himself. Ethan began to notice the world through eyes he hadn't used in years. Faces that once blurred into the background now told stories. Veterans hunched against the cold. Mothers juggling children and scarce resources. Young people struggling to survive. Each person carried a life full of challenges and resilience, invisible to the city he had once dominated. He realized that his own life had been a bubble, insulated by wealth and privilege. Ethan had walked past these same people countless times, blind to their struggles. Now, standing among them, he felt an unfamiliar humility. The streets weren't harsh. They were honest, exposing truths that luxury had hidden from him. Small acts of kindness caught his attention. A man shared a blanket with a stranger. Someone offered a seat at a crowded table. Children played quietly despite hunger and exhaustion. Ethan saw strength where he had once seen weakness, courage where he had once overlooked it. Life wasn't about control here, it was about persistence and care. He began to reflect on his previous judgments. All the people he had dismissed or overlooked had something to teach him. The arrogance that once defined him felt hollow, replaced by curiosity and a willingness to learn. Wealth had brought comfort, yes, but nothing it could offer compared to the lessons hidden in the everyday lives of these strangers. Ethan's interactions became more thoughtful. He listened before speaking, observed before acting, and offered help where it was genuinely needed. For the first time, he experienced reciprocity, not in money, but in respect, trust, and gratitude. Each day was a lesson, and each person he met was a teacher in their own right. Walking the streets, he now saw patterns and connections he had never noticed. The city wasn't chaotic. It was a network of stories, struggles, and survival strategies. And while the world outside his penthouse had seemed indifferent, here, Ethan discovered a web of human resilience he could no longer ignore. By the end of his weeks on the streets, Ethan's perspective had shifted fundamentally. Success was no longer about accumulation. It was about understanding, presence, and the subtle ways humans support each other. And just as he began to feel he understood this new reality, a moment of clarity struck, a realization so profound it would change the way he approached life forever. One cold night, lying on the floor of the shelter, Ethan finally faced the truth he had been avoiding. Money had given him power, influence, and comfort, but it had never given him purpose. He had built an empire on wealth alone, and now, stripped of it, he realized he had nothing of real value to show for his life. The realization hit him like a wave. Every decision he had made, every relationship built on convenience or status, felt empty. Ethan understood that wealth had created illusions of control, respect, and admiration. Alone on that floor, he could see the emptiness beneath the glamour and prestige he had once idolized. He thought of all the people he had dismissed or ignored, the faces on the streets, the acts of quiet courage, the bonds formed without financial incentive. They had something he had never had: authenticity. And in that moment, he envied them not for what they lacked, but for what they carried inside: resilience, humility, and a sense of purpose. Tears came not just from despair, but from the weight of clarity. Ethan admitted to himself that his life had been out of balance. He had chased wealth as if it were the ultimate goal, only to discover that real life was measured in connection, contribution, and the ability to make a difference beyond personal gain. He replayed memories of his past arrogance, the deals he had flaunted, the friendships that dissolved when money vanished. Each recollection was a lesson, a mirror reflecting the man he had been and the man he could choose to become. Pain became insight, loss became understanding, and solitude became a teacher he hadn't sought but desperately needed. For the first time, Ethan felt humility in its purest form. Not the humility he had feigned at boardroom events or charity galas, but the kind born from true vulnerability. It was raw, uncomfortable, yet enlightening. He understood that the path forward would require more than skill. It would require heart, patience, and a willingness to start over entirely. And so, as he lay there on the cold shelter floor, a seed was planted, a realization that would shape his actions, choices, and mission. Ethan knew that the days ahead would test him in ways the streets had already begun to teach, and that only by embracing this new understanding could he ever hope to find the life he truly deserved. Ethan started with the smallest tasks, the ones that didn't require money but demanded effort. He began helping at the shelter, carrying boxes, cleaning tables, and organizing supplies. At first, it felt menial, almost humiliating, but with each completed task, a sense of purpose grew. It was a stark contrast to signing million-dollar contracts, yet it felt more rewarding than anything he had done in years. He listened more than he spoke, learning the rhythms and needs of the shelter. Conversations with residents, volunteers, and staff taught him more than any boardroom ever had. He began to notice patterns in kindness and resilience, realizing that small contributions, consistently offered, could ripple into meaningful change. His hands were busy, but his mind was awakening. Ethan's pride, once a wall between him and the world, softened. He started greeting people by name, remembering details about their lives, and asking genuine questions. Every small smile returned, every nod of acknowledgement, reminded him that connection wasn't transactional. This was a new kind of wealth, measured in trust, gratitude, and respect. Slowly, his reputation within the shelter grew. People noticed his dedication, his willingness to learn, and the humility he carried. He wasn't there to show off or prove anything. He was there to contribute. That quiet effort began to draw attention in subtle ways, and Ethan realized that influence didn't require a bank account. It required authenticity. He also started to reflect on his past mistakes. Each task, each conversation prompted introspection. He asked himself why he had valued money over people for so long and what lessons he could carry forward. Small steps, he discovered, often lead to profound transformation, and the consistency of effort mattered more than grandeur. Ethan's days took on a rhythm: work at the shelter, small gestures of kindness, listening to stories of struggle and triumph. Life had become both structured and unpredictable, teaching him patience and empathy in equal measure. Each day was a chance to rebuild not just his routine, but his character, one humble act at a time. By the end of a few weeks, Ethan felt a subtle shift. The shelter wasn't just a place of survival. It was a place of learning, growth, and rediscovery. And as he continued to immerse himself in this new reality, a door opened. An unexpected opportunity was about to arrive, one that would begin the next chapter of his transformation. One afternoon, while Ethan was helping organize supplies at the shelter, Maria approached him with a question. She had been observing his dedication and humility for weeks, and she saw potential that even he hadn't recognized yet. "Would you be willing to help a nonprofit I know? They need guidance, but can't afford a consultant," she asked. The offer was simple, yet it felt monumental. Ethan hesitated. Working for free went against every instinct he had built as a millionaire. But the spark of purpose he had felt at the shelter nudged him forward. For the first time in years, he considered contributing without expecting financial reward. This was unfamiliar territory, yet something about the challenge felt invigorating. He visited the nonprofit the next day, a small organization struggling to reach its goals despite passionate staff. Ethan listened, asked questions, and slowly began to understand their vision. Unlike his previous boardrooms, here every suggestion mattered, every insight was practical, and every interaction was personal. It was raw, hands-on, and deeply rewarding. As days passed, Ethan's ideas began to take shape. He created simple strategies to streamline operations, increase outreach, and engage volunteers more effectively. The team, initially skeptical of the former millionaire, started to notice tangible results. Progress was slow, but the satisfaction of seeing lives impacted by his contributions was immediate and profound. Word of Ethan's effort began to spread. Other shelters, volunteers, and nonprofits noticed his dedication. He was no longer invisible, but this time, the recognition wasn't tied to wealth or status. It was earned through genuine effort, empathy, and a willingness to put others first. Every small success reinforced his commitment and reshaped his understanding of influence. Through this experience, Ethan discovered that purpose could outweigh profit. Helping others, teaching, and guiding a team towards a shared goal gave him more fulfillment than any deal he had ever closed. He realized that wealth in dollars was temporary, but the impact he could make in people's lives was enduring. By the end of the first few months, Ethan's life had started to shift dramatically. He wasn't just surviving, he was contributing, learning, and growing in ways he had never imagined. And though he didn't yet know it, this unexpected opportunity would set the stage for a rebuilding that was far more meaningful than anything his past life of luxury had offered. Months passed, and Ethan's life was no longer defined by mere survival. Every decision he made was guided by the lessons he had learned on the streets and in the shelter. He approached rebuilding his business with a new mindset, one that valued humility, responsibility, and creating opportunities for others rather than just personal gain. He started small, reaching out to former contacts who trusted his expertise, but this time with a focus on ethical growth and social impact. Every meeting, every proposal reflected a change in values. Ethan was determined that his rebuilt empire would not be just profitable, but purposeful, creating pathways for those who had once been overlooked. The shelters he had come to know became his partners. He integrated mentorship programs, funding initiatives, and community projects into his work. Business strategies were no longer abstract charts and numbers. They became tools to make tangible differences in lives that truly mattered. His past mistakes shaped the new blueprint of success. With each success, Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known. Deals that once excited him only for their profit now carried a deeper meaning. He measured outcomes not just by revenue but by impact, how many people were helped, educated, or inspired. The joy of seeing positive change became a reward in itself. Ethan also started sharing his journey openly. He spoke at community events, nonprofits, and local gatherings, highlighting the lessons he had learned from the streets. He didn't present himself as a fallen millionaire, but as someone who had discovered the real purpose of life through loss, humility, and human connection. Through this process, relationships shifted. People he had once dismissed became allies, mentors, and friends. Ethan realized that true collaboration required empathy, patience, and listening. Wealth had once created barriers. Now, authenticity built bridges. He understood that the greatest achievements were measured not in dollars, but in lives touched and hearts changed. By the end of the year, Ethan's empire was rebuilt, but it looked nothing like before. The difference wasn't just in the structure of the business, but in his vision, his values, and his connection to the world. He had found purpose, and with it, a profound sense of fulfillment that wealth alone could never provide. The journey from loss to impact had transformed him completely. The day came when Ethan stood on a stage at a local community event, facing an audience that didn't see him as a millionaire, but as a human being. His voice carried the weight of experience, the humility of someone who had lost everything, and the insight of someone who had learned the true value of life. The room was quiet, hanging on every word. He shared his story not as a cautionary tale, but as a journey of discovery. He spoke of the streets, the shelter, and the people who had taught him lessons money never could. He told of Tommy, Maria, and the countless others who had shown him that humanity, kindness, and empathy were far more valuable than status or wealth. The audience reacted not with awe for riches regained, but with connection to the person he had become. Parents, children, volunteers, and struggling individuals nodded, smiled, and sometimes teared up. Ethan's journey resonated because it reflected real struggles and triumphs, showing that change was possible, no matter the starting point. Questions followed his speech, not about his financial comeback, but about life, purpose, and giving back. Ethan answered openly, sharing insights he had gained through sweat, patience, and observation. Every response reinforced his transformation, showing that wisdom earned through experience was far more impactful than lessons learned from privilege. He watched faces light up as people realized they could take small actions that mattered. The same actions he had once ignored on the streets now had the power to inspire. Ethan saw firsthand that his journey from loss to meaning was not just his story. It was a message that anyone could embrace. Ethan realized that his presence, words, and actions had created ripples. What had started as survival had become mentorship, community engagement, and opportunity building. Success now had a different definition. It was measured in the positive changes he had made in others' lives, not the size of his bank account. As he left the stage, a quiet satisfaction settled over him. He had completed a full circle, from wealth to loss, from isolation to connection, from ego to purpose. Ethan understood that real wealth wasn't found in assets or titles, but in the lives touched, the gratitude shared, and the legacy of compassion he could now leave behind. Today, Ethan's life is completely transformed. His business thrives, but it is no longer the center of his universe. Shelters, mentorship programs, and community initiatives occupy much of his focus. Every decision he makes now carries the intent to uplift others, proving that wealth is truly measured by impact, not bank balances. He spends mornings visiting shelters, talking to volunteers, and guiding young people like Tommy, who remind him of lessons learned firsthand. Each interaction reinforces his purpose, and Ethan feels a fulfillment money alone could never provide. The faces he sees are reminders of resilience, gratitude, and the strength of the human spirit. Ethan's social circle has also changed. He surrounds himself with people who value honesty, kindness, and contribution over status or appearance. These connections are richer, deeper, and more meaningful than anything his previous life of luxury could offer. For the first time, he experiences a sense of belonging that isn't conditional on wealth. He reflects on his past often, not with regret, but with appreciation for the lessons it offered. Every mistake, every loss, every moment of despair became a guidepost, leading him to a life of purpose. Ethan knows now that failure isn't the end. It is a powerful teacher that can open doors to understanding, compassion, and growth. The difference is visible in small moments too. Watching children laugh, seeing volunteers share resources, and witnessing acts of kindness that ripple outward. These are the currencies that fill Ethan's life. Real wealth, he realizes, is composed of human connection, empathy, and the joy of helping others thrive. His story has inspired others to rethink their priorities. People reach out to learn how to contribute meaningfully to communities and rediscover purpose beyond material success. Ethan's journey proves that even after losing everything, one can rebuild a life that is richer, deeper, and more fulfilling than the life they thought they wanted. At the end of each day, Ethan reflects on what truly matters. Wealth has shifted from dollars to humanity, from possessions to purpose, from pride to gratitude. He understands that the greatest treasures are invisible to the eye. The relationships nurtured, the lives changed, and the legacy of humility and compassion he now carries forward. Ethan Walker thought money was everything. Losing it all taught him that the real currency of life is connection, compassion, and purpose. And maybe, just maybe, his fall wasn't a failure, but the start of becoming the man he was meant to be. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful journeys like this one, and share this video. Because someone you know might need this reminder. True wealth starts in the heart.